Accounts of the journey. Hume and Hovell's expedition from Yass to Port Phillip in 1824 was accomplished by 8 men. The principals, Hamilton Hume and William Hovell, and 6 assigned convicts. Hume took 3 men, Henry Angel, Claude Bauer, and James Fitzpatrick, while William Hovell was assisted by his own 3 men, Thomas Boyd, Samuel Bullard, and Benjamin Smith. In their book, Sounding the Ground, local historians Ron and Catherine Frew present a composite diary. Accounts of the journey from the recollections of 3 on the expedition, Hamilton Hume, William Hovell, and Henry Angel, and the editor of the Journey of Discovery to Port Phillip, New South Wales, by Messrs. W. H. Hovell and Hamilton Hume, Sydney, 1831. Dr. William Bland. We take up these voices from Horse Creek and Charcoal Gap diversion, Lanky's Creek. Hamilton Hume.
Wednesday 10th. In consequence of deep and impassable gullies, we were obliged to alter our course to the northwest and descend the mountain, from the craggy summit of which another but distant view was obtained of the Alps.
Hovell.
Thursday the 11th. At 6 we started to ascend the hill, or rather mountain, which was immediately over our heads. This we did to get into the main range, which we thought laid in our road, and to give an idea of the difficulty we had to accomplish the object. We were 3 hours getting up, the distance being 3 miles, and on arrival at the top we found we had to descend again on the other side. This took us better than another hour. We stopped to breakfast, and remained during some part at the heat of the day. To describe the way in which we were tormented by the small fly and the mosquitoes is almost impossible. Suffice it to say, to write, to read, to sleep, or to rest in any place we got to was impossible, including grumbling, scratching, or beating them away with our handkerchiefs. The dogs get into the water, the horses stand in the smoke of the fire, and the bullocks get onto the shadiest place they can find, or lay among the reeds or long grass. I know of no plan to adopt unless it to be like the natives themselves, go naked and lay in the dirt and smoke.
Hamilton Hume.
On the 12th, we were clear of the mountains. Having gotten to a good grazing country, thinly wooded, this part was named Camden Forest, from its resemblance to the cow pastures. Kangaroos were plentiful, the stones were of several kinds, but the greater portion granite. We now resumed our old course southwest, with an open country in front, and on the 14th passed a most broken mountain, which was named Battery Mount.
William Hovell.
Sunday the 14th. We did not proceed today as the cattle were too much fatigued from yesterday's journey. The men went a-hunting and brought home 1 large kangaroo, being the first we had seen for the last 4 or 5 days. As Battery Mount is only about 2 miles from us, myself and Mr. Hume went to the top, and on arrival there, the view amply paid us for our trouble. There is one continuation of forest from southwest, round to north-northeast, with scarce anything more than a gentle sloping hills, here and there rising, but to the west, as far as the eye can reach, not a hill to be seen. From northeast to east and nearly southwest, particularly southeast, is one continued line of irregular mountainous country.
Hamilton Hume.
We proceeded through a rich, open and undulating country until the 16th, when we arrived on the banks of the fine river, about 80 yards broad, and in general deep, flowing at 2 or 3 miles an hour to the west-northwest. The water, for so considerable a current, was clear. This river was named the Hume.
Hume later claimed he named the river in honour of his father, whereas Hovell states in his journal, "I named Hume's river, he being the first that saw it."
Judging it unsafe, and I may say almost impassable in consequence of its great breadth, to cross the river without the assistance of a boat, we determined on tracing it for 15 or 20 miles to the westward, in hopes of finding a shoal where we might be enabled to pass, but in this we were disappointed, and had to return and travel up the river to the east ward for 3 days, until we got above the junction of a considerable stream. This stream was now named the Oxley, now Mittamitter. In compliment to the Surveyor General, The scenery along its banks is very picturesque, and the soil equal to any colony being an alluvial deposit from the snow mountains. It is 30 yards in breadth, falling in on the south bank. At the place where we fell in with the river on the 16th, some peach stones, clover, and other grass seeds were planted, and our initials and the date of the year were cut in a large gum tree.
Bland, Tuesday, November 16th. On each side of the river is a perpetual succession of lagoons, extending generally in length from 1 to 2 miles and about a quarter of a mile in breadth. These, which are situate alternately on each side of the river, within those elbows or projections which are formed by its windings, often for miles together, preclude any approach to its banks. The spaces between the lagoons and the river partly consist of swamps and unsound ground, which even when dry, although seemingly passable by man, are impassable, or at least unsafe, for cattle. In general, these spots are thickly wooded, the trees consisting principally of the blue gum, mostly of a large growth, are overgrown with vines of various descriptions, and the fern, the peppermint, flax plant, and currajong. From the flax plant, the natives make their fishing lines and the nets which they use for carrying their travelling gear and provisions. The river abounds with that species of cod fish which is common in all the western rivers. In the lagoons, they caught a kind of brim or carp of the weight of about 2 pounds and of the finest possible flavour. The lagoons are literally crowded with wild ducks, and in the muddy bottom near the banks is plenty of large mussels. These are inferior to those found in salt water. The natives dive for them in the same manner as they procure the mud oyster near Sydney, and these, with the fish caught in the river, seem to form the principal part of their food. Their method of fishing is as follows. They select the outlet from a lagoon, which generally consists of a little stream of about 2 feet deep and of about 5 or 6 feet broad. Across this, at no great distance from its junction with the river, they form a palisade with small stakes, which are driven firmly into the mud and then carefully interwoven with wattles. Beyond this palisade, at the distance of 5 or 6 feet higher up the stream, they form a similar palisade, but leave an opening midway in its length of about 2 feet wide. A dam being thus prepared, the natives go into the lagoon, where it is sufficiently shallow for their purpose, and beating the water with their wattles and disturbing it in every possible way, drive the fish before them into the dam, which, on being successfully full, is immediately closed, the fish, in consequence, falling an easy prize. William Hovell,
16th of November 1824. In the solid wood of a healthy tree I cut my name Hovell, November the 17th, 24. Throughout the day the weather was very pleasant and favourable for the purpose we had to carry into effect, for having determined overnight to cross the river today if practical. We commenced first to patch up my tarpauling, the only one we had with us, and having done it to our satisfaction, we then made a frame neither round or square, the bow being something narrower than the stern and made something after the shape of one I had before made when wrecked in the Kent's Group, Bass Straits, in the year 1816. We then put the tarpauling over the frame, as we had done by the cart. By 4 p.m, horses, bullocks, etc. was over, but it was nearly with the loss of Mr. Hume's bullock.
Hume. On the 21st, both these rivers were crossed after much difficulty and risk, by means of a temporary boat made of a large tarpaulin. The frame of the boat was not unlike the crates commonly used for the package of crockeryware. Angel. At the second branch of the Hume River, Mittamitta, Captain Hovell wanted to turn back. He said our tarpaulin was all we had to depend upon for crossing the rivers, and that it was not a sufficient dependence. I recollect him making a speech to the men to advise them to turn back there. He asked Claude's opinion about the wisdom of returning. Claude was for going back and thought it the best advice. Mr. Hume then said that he came out with the determination of going on, and go on he should, with his own men. As for Mr. Hovell, he might keep his men and do what he liked. Mr. Hume got in a passion, and I think called both Mr. Hovell and Claude cowards, and gave Claude a shaking. They separated here again, each taking his own men. I crossed with Mr. Hume, Mr. Hovell and his men remaining on this side of the river. After we had crossed, Mr. Hovell called out to be taken with us. As for Mr. Hume, he did not seem to care whether he went without him or not, but he did stop and take him across, and they went on together once more. Source: Sounding the Ground, 19th Century Journeys to Tumbarumba in the South East, by Ron and Catherine Frew, Post Office Box 15, Tumbarumba. These scripts were read by Nick Robinson, Isaac Day, Kate Johnston and John Walker.